Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another live stream. I see people have already joined, so thanks to all those viewers who have tuned in. And I'm sure as we go forward with the live stream, with the conversation, there will be others who will be joining. So I want to welcome you all. Today, our guest is Mr. David Varnam. How are you doing?
I'm well, Tassif. How are you this evening?
I am doing well, thank you. So I'm going to be introducing you briefly, and then we'll go straight into the discussion. And I appreciate you being here and doing this live stream.
Glad to be here. Appreciate the invitation.
Sure. So David Varnam served 3 terms as the mayor of the City of Lancaster. And for those out-of-state viewers who don't know where Lancaster is, it's a beautiful city in southwest Wisconsin in Grant County. So if you're visiting Wisconsin, please do check out Grant County. It's a beautiful part of the state. So you served as the mayor of Lancaster for 3 terms, and previously, David Varnam also served 3 years on the Common Council. And he has also served as a U.S. Congressional aide and represented the global Christian ministry Focus on the Family on federal issues as an issues response analyst. So I'll be, over the course of the conversation, I'll be asking you questions about all of that. And I also, before we go into the discussion, I have to highlight that in 2022, you ran as a Republican for lieutenant governor in Wisconsin. So with that, welcome once again. And my first question to you would be, I've given a brief introduction to our viewers, but tell us more about yourself, your background, your family, and anything you want to share.
Yeah. So I grew up in Southern California, and that actually is where I met my wife in high school. And after we were best friends for many years, after college, I went away to focus on the family, and that is where I worked with Dr. Dobson. I was basically in charge of federal legislation for him in the ministry, which was a really cool job when you're 21 and fresh out of college, and was able to learn about legislation, was able to go out to Washington, D.C., meet with congressmen, senators. A very cool opportunity, but then the time came to go back and marry Jessica. And I went back to California, which is where I was when I worked for Congressman Gary Miller out of his district office in Orange County, California. Our district included Anaheim, where the Angels and the Ducks and where Disneyland is, for those that aren't familiar with the area. And then she completed medical school and then went to residency in Tyler, Texas. And so we moved to Tyler, Texas. Soon after we arrived there, we found out that she was pregnant and with our daughter Sophia, and I became a stay-at-home dad, which was a really cool experience, something I didn't see coming necessarily, but have really enjoyed. And was a stay-at-home dad. We then moved to Lancaster, where Jessica took an opportunity with High Point Family Medicine and Grant Regional Hospital here in Lancaster. And after we had been here less than 2 years, I found myself appointed to the city council. And it was kind of surprising for someone that hadn't lived there that long, but that's Lancaster. We're welcoming of outsiders, people that didn't grow up here. Everybody's welcome, and that's really cool. And soon after, I was elected mayor after having lived here less than 5 years. Served, and I should back up a little bit. Right after I was appointed to the city council, my wife and I had welcomed a second child, Abigail. And I continued to be a stay-at-home dad. And then I was elected mayor just about the time that Abigail was starting preschool. And so I would drop her off at preschool across the street from City Hall and then walk over to City Hall and be there until it was time to pick her back up. And I always like to share that one of the funny things, if you ever went around my desk at City Hall as mayor, underneath I had coloring books and activity books and crayons and things for my kids to play with, because there was times that I had to have them in the corner while I was having a meeting, or I was in another room across the hallway or somewhere else, and that's just how it was. Enjoyed being a stay-at-home dad, but there was also that mayor hat that I had to use, and I always thought it was funny because my kids grew up going to fish fries and all those community events, which I think is really neat because they know how to act around adults. uh, but used to drag my kids everywhere. I remember I even went to a meeting one time as a council member with the DOT with our whole council, and I had my kid in a carrier in the next to me. That's just how life has been. But served great 6 years here. I always said I was going to do 3 or 4 terms and be done as mayor, and that's what I did. I kept my promise to do 3 terms, and that was around the same time I was running for lieutenant governor, and I kept that because if we're not going to have term limits on our elected officials, we have to rely on our elected officials to keep those term limits. And I always said a mayor of our city should be mayor for 3 or 4 terms, and that should be it. And I felt like I needed to lead by example with that. But
Okay.
that's kind of a brief or maybe a long overview of my background. But I've for those that are wondering, I've gone back to being a stay-at-home dad and enjoy that very much. I think my girls enjoy having me at home more because during the campaign I was gone a lot. I was home every night. They just didn't necessarily see me until morning time. But also, since then, if you don't mind me saying,
Sure.
I'm now on the board of Wisconsin Family Action, Wisconsin Family Council. I also am involved with Rebecca Clayfish's 1848 group, helping local candidates that are seeking advice and mentoring on seeking a local offices. And so that keeps me busy as well.
Yeah. And I definitely have more questions about, the political life that you have, but I'm gonna ask you another question for the viewers. So you're from Southern California, you've lived in Texas. After you moved to Wisconsin, how did you deal with the change, the weather and everything? So tell us a little bit about that.
And not only the weather, but the fact that I went from a blue state to a very red state to a purple state was also very interesting. Uh, but yeah, I have always been someone who loves the cold. And when I left Colorado to go back to Southern California, that was one of the things my wife and I talked about is that I really wanted to go back to a place with seasons and
Hmm.
snow when her medical school was done. And Tyler, Texas did get some snow and some cold, but nothing like Wisconsin.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a beautiful state, and I've shared my story before. You've probably heard me say that I'm from a very, very originally. I was born and raised in a very, very hot climate in Bangladesh, and moved to Madison, and I adjusted fine. So I mean,
Yeah.
Wisconsin is so beautiful, and the seasons, as you mentioned, we get to enjoy all the seasons. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And the activities that all those seasons have. There's fishing and swimming in the summer. There's cross country skiing and snowshoeing and playing outside in the snow in the winter. It's great, and you can do all these activities right here.
Yeah, yeah. Throughout the year, there are things to do here in Wisconsin. Um, so tell us a little bit more about. You mentioned that you were a congressional staffer. Tell us more about that experience and
Yeah,
and what you learned from it.
I really enjoyed that opportunity. It was actually a member of Congress whose office I had dealt with working at Focus on the Family, and they just happened to have an opening in their office, and I applied, and it was a great experience. Worked there for 5 years. I enjoyed being in the district office, but I would say one of the things that I found most gratifying about it was that half of my job was casework, half of my job was communities issues. I handled housing, water, transportation for Congressman Miller out of his district office,
Mhm.
as well as several cities. But one of the things I found most gratifying was casework. And I think you can relate and understand that. Um, there was something really powerful about helping, a veteran that has earned medals get the medals that he deserves. There
Mhm.
is something really great about helping someone that just cannot cut through the red tape with Social Security and helping them get through that red tape. And I really enjoyed that part of being a congressional aide, where you're making those phone calls, you're dealing with the federal agency, and you're helping those individuals get through a process that should already have been easier for them. But it was made difficult by the red tape that government has. And that actually is something that I really tried to do as mayor. I really tried to help those individuals that reached out with a problem that they had as mayor, because when people call the mayor, when people call the congressman that I'm working for, when they
Mhm.
call that head elected official, they're at the end of their rope. It's not the first call, it's the last call. And we as elected officials, we as congressional aides, when I did that, our job was to help those residents, to help those people cut through the red tape that government had put in front of them. And I found that very gratifying as a congressional aide, and it was one of my favorite things as mayor, because when you can help someone, it makes such a big difference to them. And I should say, you can't help every person. There's times that there's reasons, but you just can't help them to where they want it to be. Like as mayor, there's just times that you couldn't help them because the law says this or whatever that situation was. But for many, that was the first time they felt like somebody really listened to them, somebody really tried to help them. And as a congressional aide, it made government seem smaller to those people because there was somebody that was willing to listen to their problem and try to help them.
Absolutely. And that part is so important, to be someone in government who's there to listen, because oftentimes people out there, senior citizens, I use senior citizens as an example because obviously they are running into lots of issues with Social Security and Medicare and so many other things. Sometimes constituents need someone that they can talk to, somebody who is willing to sit down and listen. And it's as public servants have many important roles to play, but that's one of them, to listen and to try to provide relief.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you obviously have worked for an elected official at the federal level. You've served as an elected official at the local level. Tell us more about your experience as the mayor of Lancaster. You've already shared quite a bit, but you served on the city council. So what prompted you to run for mayor?
I just felt like it was time for a change in our city. At the time, we had our longest serving mayor in the history of the city, that his seat was coming up. He was kind of undecided. I decided to throw my hat into the ring. And shortly after, he decided that he wasn't going to run again. And was able to run unopposed actually in that election, because his announcement was just a few days before the filing started. And so that changed the situation. But it just felt like it was time for a change. I think it's important for local officials, especially mayors, to limit themselves to a few terms because you bring in new ideas, a new way of doing things. And I think that's not only good for the community, I think it's good for the employees and for the city. And felt like it was time for a change there. And like I said, I did 3 terms and I allowed someone else, I allowed there to be an election to have a replacement. And I think it's important to give our communities that ability to choose their voice, to choose their elected official. And it's good to have those elections where you have new blood coming into an office.
Yeah, yeah. And local offices are very, very different, very interesting, because if you are the mayor of a moderate sized city or a small city, then you're running into your constituents all the time. And I'm sure you've probably, I'm just guessing, but you've probably been in situations where you're grocery shopping and maybe somebody comes up and says, "Hey mayor, this is a problem, what can you do about it?" So I mean, what are some of the, like, when you were the mayor, just tell us about some interactions that you had, some issues that you dealt with. Maybe there were times when the council said something and you disagreed, or just share some experience, whatever you want to share with us.
Well, and there's several levels of that. One is yes, small city mayor. I and it was great, right? But yeah, I could not go to the grocery store without being stopped with a question or a concern or hey, why is the city doing this? But that's also important because they not only feel that they can talk to me, but they can hear it from me. They can hear it from their elected official. This is what's going on. Because especially in small cities, rumors can run rampant. And I think it's really important to get ahead of that. And that was why I always tried to make sure to answer emails as quickly as I could, to make sure I had social media. I had a Mayor David Varnam page when I was mayor, to communicate what was going on, because I felt it was important to get that out there, because local news doesn't always cover what's going on. You have city council meetings, you might discuss 10, 15, 20 issues on that agenda. Not everything is going to be reported, and people might not necessarily know what's happening. Um, but for example, I think being mayor, being a local elected official is so important because there's good things that happen and there's bad things that try to happen as well. And there's legislation, there's discussions on issues that you need I think conservative elected officials to help stop some of these things. For example, I had threatened to veto it, but then ended up breaking a tie vote and defeating a wheel tax in the city of Lancaster a few years ago. There was discussion of banning hunting on all public lands, including a park that's several miles outside of town that people have hunted on for years. And I threatened the veto on that, and it ended up not going anywhere when it came back at the next meeting. If I wasn't in that position, if a conservative wasn't in that position, those types of legislation, those ideas, they might go forward. And for example, breaking the tie. Imagine if you had someone who was in favor of the wheel tax, that would have gone into effect here in the city of Lancaster. And that's why it's so important for conservatives to run for local office, whether that's running for council, running for mayor, being on your school board. There are so many important issues that go through that body that people just don't understand. And that's why I always thought it was interesting. When I worked for a member of Congress, I would get those calls where people would be upset about something their city council is doing. And it would say, no, you should call your city council member, you should call your mayor, you should communicate that message to them. I think a lot of people think that the presidential race is the most important, and it's really important, don't get me wrong. But your local elected officials impact your life more daily than who the president of the United States does. Because if you go to turn on your faucet and your water doesn't run, if your lights don't turn on when you flip the switch, there's a big pothole in your road, it's your local elected official that you need to reach out to. That is who's in charge of fixing those issues. And so when you're driving on your local roads, when you're going to work in your city or your town, that local elected official is much more important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, I keep highlighting that it's important to vote in those elections when you have the local races. It's not just, the presidential year when you vote or, a midterm election here in Wisconsin. Like the spring elections are so very important. And so, because you mentioned the wheel tax, I just want to share because this is something that I've written about. I live in
Mhm.
Madison, Wisconsin, which is in Dane County for out of state viewers. We have the city wheel tax, we have the county wheel tax. And so by the time you add those up and what you pay to the state, it's more than $150 per vehicle
Mhm.
per year. And so you mentioned that you vetoed, like you said you would veto if the council approves a wheel tax. So now we often hear that local governments don't have enough revenue or there are more needs and not enough money. But you, as a conservative mayor, I mean, if you would have said, yeah, fine with the wheel tax, let's get more revenue, but you didn't do that. You wanted people to keep more of their money. You did not want to
Mhm.
raise taxes. Do people appreciate that? What feedback do you get?
Well, I would say I think in that instance they did, and I think a lot of people reached out to let me know before and after that vote happened, and I think a lot of people were opposed to that. But for example, I mean, it's not just the individual taxpayer, it's not just the individual resident. Businesses are impacted, and I remember talking to a business owner who lived just outside of our city limits. He lived in one of the towns, and he told me, "I have my business in the city of Lancaster. I have more than a dozen vehicles registered in the city. If the city passes this, I am going to move those vehicles outside of the city and maybe my business." Those are the concerns, right? We're worried about those residents, but we also need to be worried about these businesses in our communities. And that's what I see as a problem with this wheel tax. There are really not that many cities and towns that have a wheel tax. If you look at how many have it, it's really less than 100. And we're talking about all the towns, all the cities. It is close to 2,000. And a lot of people want to pretend that a lot of these communities have it, but they don't. And if you pass one of these as a city, immediately those cities and communities around you are going to be competing for your residents and your businesses. And I think that's important to understand when these elected officials look at that, because these businesses might move. These businesses that were thinking about coming in might not now. And so it might seem like, well, it's not that much money, but it could really impact thousands of dollars that comes into the community from property taxes that businesses and residents would pay if they reside there or operate their business there.
Absolutely. It's all about thinking about the long term, and it's thinking about the long term impacts. Yeah. So, from your experience, what would you say to someone who is thinking about running for mayor or for city council or other local office?
I would say do it. I think that there is not a lot better than serving your community in that way. And there's lots of different avenues that you can choose from. I mean, you can be on school board, you can be on council, you can be mayor, but you don't. Not everybody has to be mayor, right? You can be a council member, you can be one of a body making those decisions. When I first got on council, I didn't think I was going to run for mayor, and I did. But I also saw first all of the good I could do as a council member. But our communities desperately need conservatives to be on those boards and a part of those government bodies. And I think if you're a conservative thinking about running, you can find people to help you. You can find people that help guide you. 1848 Project, for example, and other organizations are out there that are able to help local conservatives that are running for office. And even the Republican Party has gotten involved in these races. There are different groups that do trainings all over the state. You might not know how to run a campaign, but there are people that can help you. And if you're thinking about it, reach out to your local county party, ask for help. They will be able to direct you to some of these organizations that can help you to run, because it can seem daunting, but it is so important to get conservatives on this group. And I should say we had a local elected official here in Lancaster that got elected recently, and they were wearing a shirt of a Democratic group on them when they got sworn in. And so, guess what? The other side is also trying to get their believers and people that align with them onto these bodies as well. And so, definitely reach out, definitely think about how you can help your community by being a part of the government body, because it is so important for you to be there.
So, to all the conservatives who are watching live and those who may watch the replay of this live stream, it's an important message that you should get involved. If you want to see change in your community, if you're frustrated with how things are, how government is being run, then of course you're going to call your elected official, you're going to voice your opinion, your concerns, you're going to write letters to editors. There are so many ways you can make your voice heard, but if you want to be a part of the change, you can also run for office, and it's so important. So I'm glad you highlighted that. Um, Now let's talk about. We're going to talk about the statewide office that you ran for, as well as some other questions that I have here. But let's talk about voter turnout. We see higher voter turnout for a presidential race. Midterms also get a fair amount of attention depending on what um, who's on the ballot. Obviously, what races are taking place. But let's talk about local elections. How to increase voter turnout for local elections, the spring elections in particular.
I think it matters who's on the ballot. I think it matters if there's competitive races or not. I also think it matters if there's a presidential primary going on. Uh, it's believed that I hold the record for the most votes for mayor ever, because in 2016, when I ran and was on the ballot, that was when the Republican primary still mattered in that primary, and we had Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and President Trump all on the ballot. And on the Democratic side, they were also still voting on Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, and people turned out to vote because that was at the top of the ticket. And so I got a lot of votes because of that. But unfortunately, in some of these local races, people just do not turn out. And it starts with having good candidates that are on the ballot, that are working hard to remind people that they need to turn out and vote for them. Because you might not have a local council race that's competitive, but there might be a judge race like what we're going to have in April that is very important that you need to turn out for. And I think we've seen that if we could get if we could get even close to a presidential turnout from November to show up in April, conservatives would not have a problem electing justices to the Supreme Court that we would be happier with.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's very important. There's so much of discussion about, okay, how do you reach the voters? How do you make them understand the importance of local elections? And I think as time goes by, especially since the COVID outbreak, I think people understand the importance of local elections and the importance of having conservative leaders in local elected offices, because obviously we saw what the left did with the COVID mandates and the mask mandates and the shutdowns and the lockdowns. And so I think that people are more aware of what's going on and why it's so important to elect conservatives in local races. So um, now let's switch to the statewide race that you were a part of. You ran for the office of lieutenant governor here in Wisconsin, and obviously the campaign made you travel all over the state, because I followed your social media, so I know you were going to all different counties and speaking in front of different groups. So tell us about that experience.
It was a great experience. I think, looking back on it, it wasn't something I expected to do 10 years ago, for example. But looking back on it, what a great experience to travel this great state, to get to go to areas that you hope someday you would get to go to. I traveled more than 1,000 miles a week on average. I was in the race for 53 weeks, and I did about 55,000 miles of traveling throughout the state, and made it to almost all of the counties. And it was a great experience. But one thing I definitely was reminded of is that there are great people who really care about our state all over our state. And you would hear those concerns, but you would also hear the optimism that we have such a great state, and that we just needed to fix some things. We needed new government. We needed new leadership. And unfortunately, we didn't get a new governor. But it was really encouraging to go all over the state and meet conservatives who were truly concerned and were trying to make a difference in our state. And I think that's encouraging. And it was a great experience. I was definitely glad to have had it. I miss my time with my family, and I'm glad that I'm home now to be able to spend more time with them, because I have a kid that's entering middle school and a kid that's entering freshman year of high school. And I won't be able to get that time back, but I'm really glad to be with them now and spend more time. But I really, looking back on it, I think it will always be something that I will think was a great life experience, and an experience that I will have forever.
Yeah, so I know that, and this is speaking from a little bit of a tourism angle. We have lots of great restaurants and supper clubs, and places where you can get sundaes and ice cream and all that all over the state. So, as you were traveling, did you get to check out a lot of great places, supper clubs and restaurants, and all the different tourist destinations
I did.
across the state?
And I would say too, especially when I had my one or both of my girls with me, we definitely hit those ice cream places and the fairs. And those were definitely weekends where the girls were like, "Oh, you're going to fairs? Okay, we'll go along." And that's great, because everybody loves good fair food and lots of fried things on sticks. But that that was definitely something that happened, is we visited a lot of the food places, whether it was at a fair or at small towns. As you were driving through and you saw the ice cream shop you'd heard of before,
Yeah.
we stopped at those places.
Yeah. And so did you just because we entered July, but June is always a big month because it's dairy month and we're America's dairy land. So when you were campaigning for lieutenant governor, did you get to go to a lot of dairy breakfasts?
I did. And one of the neat things was, it wasn't just quite June. Greene County, for example, started Memorial Day weekend that year.
Yeah.
And so even in May, the dairy breakfast has started. But that was also kind of fun too, because you started discovering what certain dairy breakfasts had, whether Greene County, for example, had a crumble cake, I believe it was, or coffee cake. And when I sat down at a table with my wife and we were eating breakfast, there was somebody there who came there just for that cake, that they lived several counties over and had heard about the coffee cake there and drove there to have the coffee cake on the farm. And I thought that was so neat. But yeah, you definitely found those places that had these little unique touches that other ones didn't have, uh, including ice cream for breakfast and some of the things that you hear about. But that was unique too, was
Yeah.
the different food options that some of them had.
Yeah. So, what would you say to someone? Now, I asked you this question about local office, but what would you say to someone who is thinking of running for a statewide office? Obviously, a lot more work, a lot more travel. But what's your message?
I would say if you feel that you're supposed to run statewide, be ready for having to work hard. And if you want to run for state office, but you just want your name on the ballot, you shouldn't do it. But if you're willing to put in the miles, to put in the time and travel all over the state, uh, that is a good start. Because, for example, there was a day I went up to La Crosse for the third district caucus, and then I drove all the way across the state to Florence County to speak at their Lincoln Day dinner, and then came back across and spent the night in Portage County to get ready for a Lincoln Day dinner the next morning. But that's the type of driving, that's the type of time that you have to invest. Another one that comes to mind is when I had to go from Lancaster to Door County down to Racine for their Lincoln Day dinner and then back home. Our state is massive, and you realize it when you're a statewide candidate. And it's great. Don't get me wrong. I loved when I went to Door County that morning. I was arriving into Sturgeon Bay at like 8 o'clock in the morning in October, and it was so beautiful. And that is such a fond memory I have of Door County and being there that early and watching the drawbridge go up, and it was great. But you have to be prepared to work hard because Wisconsinites, not only do they deserve someone who's willing to work hard, but that's what they're going to be looking for. Someone that wants it so bad that they're willing to do these types of miles, that they're willing to make all of these stops. We need leaders who are willing to work hard. We see it on the presidential level right now with someone that wants to call it quits at 8 o'clock at night. Um, the job entails more than that. And I think if you're going to run statewide in Wisconsin, if you're going to seek any office, you need to be prepared to work hard. When I was mayor, I would have the city hall phone ring to my cell phone when I wasn't there. So if you called that in the line, you would get me and my cell phone, and I would get those late night phone calls because there was something going on, that something wasn't working, or there was a water issue, or there was something happening. It's not a 9 to 5 job as an elected official. You need to be ready to work weekends. You need to be ready to work nights. And whether it's statewide or local, that's going to happen. That you're going to need to go to these things. But statewide, I really enjoyed not only running for office, but being able to be there with the other people running for office, even lieutenant governor, just like I was. Those were some hardworking individuals. And it was really neat for me to be able to experience that, where you would go to an event and you would see the governor candidates, lieutenant governor candidates, the attorney general candidates, secretary of state, treasurer. They were all there. And then you'd see them at the next place and the next place. And they were working hard. But it was so great to be able to see that, because when those people that won that nomination, those people and like John Leiber, they got elected, you saw the effort they put in, and you knew that they deserved it because they had worked so hard to get to that. And
Yeah.
many of us lost in the primary, but that didn't mean that those others didn't work hard, because they did. And I saw it firsthand. It wasn't just me out there doing lots of hours. They were all doing it as well.
Yeah, yeah. And, that's what's so great about us conservatives, the Republicans, that we have healthy competition. Like you said, when you ran, there was a primary, and obviously people voted, and there's one winner. But the process of running, because I was also at many of these, events and caucuses and Lincoln Day dinners, so I saw the candidates come in and they were doing their speeches, and like you see on the Democratic side, the establishment often tends to, they pick their favorite and no more competition. But on the Republican side, there's competition, and that's a good thing.
We welcome it. And to me, it's democracy. it's so interesting how on the federal level right now, Democrats are talking about how you need to vote for Joe Biden and save democracy, and then now there's all this talk about, well, maybe we need to switch our candidate at the convention. I mean, I was in a race for lieutenant governor that at one point had 9 candidates in it, and we were all out there working hard, and we let the voters decide, and that's how it should be. I
Absolutely.
think I understand sometimes you don't want a race that's going to have like 30 people in it, but you know what? Tony Evers was in a huge field, and he won that nomination, and he went on to be elected governor, and then elected to a second term. So this idea that you need to have just one candidate in a primary or 2 candidates in a primary is false, because Governor Evers has been elected twice now, and he came from a much larger primary than any race that the Republicans have had recently.
And I think about 2016. Remember how many presidential candidates there were? I mean, the debate stage would be full, and then there would be more who did not qualify to be on the debate stage. But so many candidates running, and so competition is good.
Mhm.
And that also shows that we, the Republicans, we have great candidates. There's
Yeah,
always one winner, but we have the candidates who are willing to put the effort and invest their time and energy and work hard.
I think for
Um,
a lot of these offices, state and federal, we have really good benches of people that we can look at for these future races and think they would be really good in that role. And I think that's encouraging for the future.
yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you, how much do you stay involved in politics now? You already mentioned, but I'll let you elaborate.
Yeah, so I'm involved and on multiple levels. I'm on the board of Wisconsin Family Action and Council. I've helped, like, as I said previously, with the 1848 group, which is the group that Rebecca Clayfish started. I'm helping local candidates that were running for office in the last cycle. I'm also involved locally as well, and helping candidates in my region that are running for local office. I am behind the scenes helping there and trying to get them elected as well. But I've also been involved with the Grant County Republican Party. I know you had our Vice Chair Molly Bond on last week. I watched that interview actually and enjoyed what she had to say. But she talked about all the things that our local party did and continues to do now. And I was vice chair of that group for many terms, but stepped aside because I felt like it was time to have new blood. And I'm really glad that Molly is involved in that position. But that's another way that I'm still involved. I still help out with the party as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I had a great conversation with Molly, and she's obviously working really hard. And let's increase the votes in Grant County as we look at November 2024. So it all goes back to voter turnout. How can we energize voters to come out and vote for conservative candidates and really conservative common sense ideas? That's what
Yeah,
it is. We want you to keep more of your money. That's a common sense idea. So. Um, looking forward to major victories in November. Now,
well, and
talk,
if I
sure,
could say
absolutely.
really quick too, in Grant County, we were a Democratic county when it came to voting for president for many cycles. The 80s was the last time that a Republican had won Grant County until Donald Trump won it in 2016. And he won it again in 2020. And not only did he win it again, but he won it with more votes. There was almost 3,000 more votes in that race that came out to vote in 2020 versus 2016. And so it's really great to see that happening in Grant County because we were seen as a Democratic county when it came to voting for president. And we have been able to turn that tide, and people like Molly and our chairman, Bill Beefer, are working really hard to keep that in that right direction.
Absolutely. And I really enjoy attending Grant County Republican Party events. I've attended various caucuses and Lincoln Day events over the years, and it's always wonderful to be at a Grant County Republican Party event and to meet the great people. I mean, really, freedom loving Americans. That's how I would describe the 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 people who are associated with Grant County Republican Party. They love
Absolutely.
the freedom and the constitutional rights that we have. So
Absolutely. And appreciate every time you've come out. We first met at one of the Republican events here when you came to speak many years ago. So
Yes.
appreciate all the effort that you've made here and all the time that you've come out to help us.
Yeah. And it's amazing how time flies now that we think about like where I first met you, and it's been so many years. And we continue to fight for freedom. The fight is on. We continue to fight for freedom. So, and we'll continue to do that. Now, having said that, let's talk about November 2024.
Okay.
How optimistic are you about the 2024 election? And in particular, let me first ask you about the Senate race, the U.S. Senate race. Do you think that the Republicans will be able to defeat Tammy Baldwin? Eric Hovde is the nominee, and he's obviously, I see on social media, he's working hard, traveling around the state, doing lots of events, trying to reach out to voters. And there's tremendous support from the Republicans, the grassroots Republicans, for Eric Hovde. Do you think that we will be able to regain this U.S. Senate seat in Wisconsin by defeating Tammy?
Yeah, I think we can. I think it's possible. I think that Eric Hovde and his team are working really hard. I think they're running a good campaign so far. I don't expect that to change. And I think that it's going to be really important for conservatives to turn out. I also think we just had a conversation about Grant County. Tammy Baldwin won Grant County 6 years ago. But Donald Trump in this last election pulled nearly 5,000 more votes than Tammy did in Grant County. And so if we can get those people that voted for Donald Trump last time to show up this time to vote for Donald Trump and to vote for Eric Hovde, that will make a big difference. Because if we start seeing the western side of Wisconsin going for Eric Hovde, I think that's a real positive, because when you look at what happened with the Evers election the last two times and with Tammy, you see the southwest corner being blue. And I think if we can keep that red, like has been happening in the last few election cycles, I think that's a real positive. And just to back up for a moment, Tim Michels won Grant County in the last governor election. 4 years prior, Tony Evers did. It was very narrow, but Tony Evers won Grant County. We were one of the few counties that went for Evers in the first election, and the second election went for Tim Michels. And I think we're seeing that red moving into Grant County. I think if we can keep that momentum happening, I think that will really help Eric Hovde on election night.
Yeah. My next question is about something that makes me very concerned. And I'm sure you've heard about the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruling regarding absentee ballot drop boxes. What thoughts do you have about it? I'm very much concerned. I think this ruling really shows that there's activism happening at the Supreme Court. The liberal justices, they are just legislating from the bench. But I want to hear your thoughts.
This is not just a case that came up for the first time. This is a case that was settled, that had gone through our Supreme Court. There had been a ruling, and then millions of dollars pours into this race. It flips, and they revisit the case. And how concerning is that? Do we really want the Supreme Court to be that politicized? And that is the concern that I have. I think this should concern all Wisconsinites, that we're seeing this flip. Do you really want millions of dollars to pour into your state and then to see some of these changes where the rulings that were already settled are being flipped? That should be the concern that causes Wisconsinites to think, okay, we got to stop this. And I am concerned about it. And I think that they're really overstepping here, because what is in the law is very specific. And the Supreme Court is interpreting what looks very clear in a way that is incorrect. They're very much bullet points as to what is required, and the Supreme Court is ignoring that.
Yeah. So I'm going to come back to 2024, but let me jump ahead because it's relevant. Let me talk about 2025. There is a Supreme Court race coming up, and if we want to restore, sanity, I should say, when you look at the Supreme Court, because now with the liberal majority, this ballot drop box is just one example. I mean, who knows what other actions the Supreme Court with the liberal majority might take. So in 2025, there is an opportunity to restore the rule of law as it pertains to how the Supreme Court operates. So are you hopeful? I know I'm jumping ahead, and I'm going to come back to 2024, but 2025. Do you think that we can elect a conservative justice and regain the conservative majority?
I'm encouraged. I think, first of all, I think conservatives saw what happened because they didn't turn out to vote, and they didn't work to turn out to vote. I think people that sat it out, thought that they didn't need to turn out to vote, are regretting that now. But I'm also encouraged because Brad Shimmel is working really hard right now. I have seen him all over the state. I've seen him in different counties. He is working really hard and putting in the effort. And I just saw a press release about his fundraising numbers. I mean, people are donating to his campaign as well. I think conservatives that realized what happened as a result of last year's election are not only turning out to events, they're donating money. And I think that is really important because that's another way we can help people. We need to knock doors, but we also need to be able to get that message out on TV and radio and in print, and donations help that. And so his fundraising numbers are very encouraging.
That's wonderful to hear. And I remember, when Brad Shimmel was the Attorney General, he was an amazing Attorney General. He did some, I mean, his record. I mean, it's a record of success. He was a great Attorney General, and it would be wonderful to have him as a Supreme Court justice here in Wisconsin.
Yeah, and a quick Brad Shimmel story. So the first time I ever met him, he was running for Attorney General the first time, and I was the campaign manager for our now sheriff. And our now sheriff was speaking, and my little child, who was 1 year old, was crying in her stroller in the back. And I was trying to take pictures of our now sheriff, and all of a sudden she was cooing and she was laughing, and I'm like, "What is happening?" I look over, and Brad Shimmel has walked over and is playing with her in her stroller. And she is smiling and laughing. The crying had stopped. And I thought, wow, this is a great guy. He came over because he saw me taking pictures of the sheriff candidate, and he is taking care of my baby in the stroller. And that is Brad Shimmel. And he has an amazing story, a great background. He would be an incredible Supreme Court justice. But to me, he's the guy that helped my baby when I was taking pictures. And it's just, to me, it's such a great memory.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm really looking forward to supporting. I support him. I told him that when I saw him, and I was just so happy that Brad Shimmel announced that he's running for Supreme Court. And I said, you know what? This is it. I am hopeful that we're going to be able to win in 2025, and so I'm very optimistic and hopeful about 2025. But I'm going to come back to 2024 now. What are your thoughts about the Trump versus Biden race, and do you think that Trump will win Wisconsin, and will he become president again? Now, you've mentioned about the trend in Grant County that in 2016 Trump won Grant County. In 2020 his votes increased. As we look at 2024, once again, hoping that he gets even more votes from Grant County, but obviously there are so many other counties around the state. Statewide, what do you think his chances are of success?
I'm very encouraged. And I think we're seeing those poll numbers. It's becoming more and more positive. We don't know what the Democrats are going to do. And so we have to keep our foot on the gas pedal here. We have to keep working hard because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if Joe Biden's going to be that nominee. So we cannot take it for granted. But I am very encouraged as the numbers I'm seeing, the signage, everything else. To me, it's very positive right now. And obviously, we have the convention coming to Wisconsin, and I think that should help as well because we're going to have the eyes of the world on Wisconsin, and I think that that's going to really help Trump and his numbers here in our state. But we're seeing in those swing states, there's a lot of shift right now, And I saw some numbers today that even in some of these states that they thought leaned Republican, that now they're becoming more likely Republican. And that's
Mhm.
really good for President Trump as well, because now they don't have to invest as much resources into those states. They can invest it into more swing states. But the fact that we're even talking about poll numbers in Michigan and Pennsylvania and some of those tightening or even leaning toward Trump, that's amazing at this point. And I think that is a real positive for the Trump campaign and for Republicans.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I mean, the eyes of the world are on Wisconsin right now. It's not just the eyes of the country. I mean, the whole world is watching,
Yep.
and people are going to be watching the RNC and paying attention to all the developments, and there'll be so many news updates. I mean, it's going to be a very busy week for the media of the world, I
Yep.
think, reporting on everything that's going to be taking place at the RNC. All the leaders will be there, so I'm really looking forward to that. And we're so fortunate to have the RNC here in our
Yeah.
state. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now,
The eyes will be on Wisconsin, and I think that that is just so important. But it's also just a great showcase for our state. We have an amazing state, and we want people to think it's more than just snow and football here. We want them to be able to see all of the great things that are here. And if I can for a moment, I wanted to say one more thing too about the 2024 election. Um, the legislature. We've had redistricting here in the state, and I think it's also important that we show up for those local assembly and senate races. The presidential race, the senate race, they're very important. But you know what? Tony Evers has pushed this to where we have this redistricting, and we need to show that we don't support the policies of Tony Evers. Think of all the vetoes he's had, all the common sense legislation that he vetoed, and that our leaders in the Assembly and the Senate pushed, saving women's sports, tax
mhm.
cuts for the middle class. They made it all the way through to the governor's desk and he vetoed them. And we need to send the message in these races that we supported the Republican policies that were passed by our leadership in the Assembly and the Senate and by our Assembly members and our senators, because some of them are fighting for their careers right now because they've been put into these races that made it that Democrats think are going to be a lot closer. But you know what? I live in an area where these seats are considered in the past, they've been considered leaning Democrats. Republicans have won them. Why? Because they knock the doors and they talk about what they're going to do and they back it up with the votes that they've had. And I think when these Republican legislators get out there, I think the public is going to see these common sense measures that Evers voted or vetoed, and I think it's going to help Republicans. And so I think we're going to win on this message, but it's going to be all the way down the ballot that we need to show up for, because it's important that we elect Donald Trump. It's important that we elect Eric Hovde, but it's also important that we cast votes for the Republicans running for the Senate, state Senate, and state assembly.
Absolutely, and thank you for highlighting that because, um, if we talk about redistricting, we can talk for a really long time because
Yeah.
I've seen some of the districts based on the map that we had before and the new map, and you can see, I mean, where the Democrats are going with this. They want to increase their seats in the assembly and in the state senate. But you're right. If people turn out and they vote for common sense policies, if they vote for elected officials who will protect their constitutional rights, elected officials or candidates who will protect their freedom, then I'm very confident that the Republicans will win and still, in a very
Yeah.
strong fashion, maintain the majority in the state senate and the state assembly.
Yeah, and I live in the third congressional district, so I also have the Derek Van Orden seat here, which is a seat that the Democrats are trying to win. They think they can win, but you know what? Derek Van Orden is so hardworking. He is all over our district, and I think we can really send the message on election day in some of these races, whether it's getting Derek Van Orden reelected, which helps the Republicans to keep the House, to
Absolutely.
pushing back on Tony Evers by electing a Republican assembly member and senator. We can really send a message, but it's going to take all of us working hard, knocking doors, making donations, making phone calls, putting signs in our yard, and spreading the Republican message throughout the state.
Absolutely. And you highlighted a good point that we have to keep the majority in the House. I say keep the majority and grow the size of the majority, because right now we have a House majority, the Republicans, but it's razor thin. It's
Hmm.
razor thin. So we have to make sure that Derek Van Orden gets reelected. And obviously, in the 8th congressional district, also, that's empty after Mike Gallagher left the House. We're going to have to make sure that that stays in the Republican hands. And obviously, there are other competitive seats across the country where Republicans have to win and keep the majority, grow the majority. So all of that's very important. So um, as you are, you know, talking to people in your neighborhood, in your city, what are the big issues that people talk to you about? Just in your everyday conversations, what are you hearing from people?
Do you mean local issues or federal issues or what?
Just federal issues. I hear about inflation a lot, and
Hmm.
every time I'm grocery shopping, I am a consumer impacted by inflation. I hear about the border crisis. People express their concerns, but what are some of the issues you are hearing from the
Yeah,
people?
you hit on the two issues I was going to mention there: inflation and immigration. I hear about a lot. I think inflation, especially, that's a local issue, that's a state issue, that's a federal issue. It hurts people when they go to the grocery store. It also hurts local communities when they go to fix a road or build a bridge because everything has gone up, and that money that they thought they had set aside for a project, now there's not enough. Immigration, such an important issue, and I think I have a really interesting perspective on it because I grew up in Southern California where I saw firsthand the negatives of illegal immigration. And now in Wisconsin and in other states, you're starting to see those negatives much more than we ever have. And that's because of the broken border policies of our president. And I think as many illegals are coming across, think about how many illegals are coming into our country. It's bigger than the state of Wisconsin population. And that is a scary thought. And instead of it just impacting places like California and Texas, it's impacting states like Wisconsin and other states in the Midwest. And I think that is why it's such an important issue in some of these swing states, because that issue has arrived at our doorstep.
Absolutely. And people often say that every state is now a border state. Every state is now a border state. And especially when you look at the neighboring state of Illinois and the city of Chicago, that's a sanctuary city. And I've talked about Chicago a lot over the last few months on my channel. But really, when resources run out in Chicago, and because that city is attracting illegal immigrants because of the sanctuary policies. When resources run out in Chicago, where will the illegal immigrants go? Will some of them make their way to Wisconsin? Will we see the impact? We already are. We already are.
Well, and not only that, when they run out of those resources, when they run out of the money because they're spending so much due to illegal immigration, where do they go? They go to the federal government. And all of us taxpayers are paying for Chicago being a sanctuary city. We're all paying for the problems that we see in some of these big cities that are passing that type of legislation, those types of bills. And that is why we in Wisconsin need to speak up on this issue because it impacts our pocketbook ultimately.
Absolutely. And if we win the U.S. Senate seat in Wisconsin, if we can help Derek Van Orden get reelected, if we can hold on to the seat in the 8th congressional district, and if there are other races, if we can win some of those races, we maintain the majority in the House, we regain the majority in the Senate, and if we can help Donald Trump win Wisconsin, 10 electoral college votes from here, and hopefully some other battleground states also, then our country can really head in the right direction. Obviously, with the damage that the Biden administration has caused and continues to cause, there's going to be a lot of work for the Trump administration. Because I say Trump administration because I'm positive, I'm hoping he's going to get elected, but there's going to be a lot of repairs that the new administration would have to do because of so much of damage already done.
But think about what you just said too. I think it's important to note. People always say, "Well, does my vote matter? Does my vote make a difference?" All the races that you just rattled off. If you're a Wisconsin voter, you're going to have impact on the presidential race, the Senate race, who controls the House. If you're upset with the current policies of the administration, if you're upset with Chuck Schumer being the leader of the Senate, your vote has so much power to change that right now. Your vote can change the direction that our country is going right now, and we can change it for the good.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll just keep saying on my channel, I'm going to use my voice. I'm going to use my writing because I enjoy writing. Um, and I'm just going to do my part in making sure that I'm making people aware of what you just said. Your vote matters. So vote, vote, vote. Make your voice heard. Um, let's talk about something that's on everyone's mind. Who's going to be Trump's VP? And any thoughts? So, two parts. Who do you think Trump will pick? That's one. And the other angle is like, if Trump asks you for your recommendation, what recommendation would you have?
Well, my general recommendation would be it needs to be a strong conservative. It needs to be someone that I think is conservative on the issues. I'd
Mhm.
like to see someone that's strong pro-life, but also strong on immigration, strong on inflation. I always think that the VP needs to be someone that can be president. It needs to be someone that can step in the unfortunate events that might lead to them being elevated to president. You need someone who can lead. I think there's a lot of people on that short list. I personally thought a few weeks ago, even before the list came out, that I would like to see either Senator Tim Scott or Marco Rubio be elevated to vice president there. I think it's really important that we have someone that's really strong on the life issues there. And I've been a little concerned with some of what I've heard with our platform, but I feel that might come out for a vote next week. I think we need to stay the party of life, and I think we need to have strong language passed at the convention. But I think one way that President Trump could send that message is having a strong pro-lifer as his vice president.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Tim Scott. I actually so over the last few months, I have had a lot of discussion on my channel about who Trump's VP may be. I've thought about different recommendations, and finally, I arrived at the conclusion that you know if if my recommendation would be Tim Scott. And so I ended up writing a letter to the editor, got published in New York Daily News, and it was all about, Tim Scott is the right choice. Now, does that mean that, you know, uh, I mean, if Trump picks somebody else, because I see the names in the short list, so other names have been mentioned. I think Glenn Youngkin's name was mentioned, Marco Rubio's was mentioned, um, J.D. Vance, and then others also. So whoever Trump picks, that person's going to have my support because I'm confident that Trump is going to make the right decision and pick the right running mate. But if you ask me, like I asked you, I would say Tim Scott. So I think we have agreement there because you mentioned Tim Scott too. Yeah,
And we'll see. We're going to find out here in about a week or less. And
yeah,
so all of this talk, all the speculation will come to an end. But I think ultimately, whatever the ticket, there is going to be a clear choice here between the failed policies that we've seen over the last 4 years or what we saw before that, and the prosperity that we as a country had. That it's going to be clear. The vision will be clear. And I think that we will have clear choices as Americans as to where we want to see our country go.
absolutely, absolutely. It was so wonderful having this conversation with you. And we talked about so many important things, and um, it's a really exciting time. I mean, on one hand, there are so many challenges that we have as a country right now. There are so many things that make me worried, issues that keep people up at night: inflation, border crisis, crimes going up in so many parts of the country. But then on the other hand, I feel optimistic, and I know you do feel optimistic also because you expressed that here in this conversation, that we can win the House races, we can win the Senate race here in Wisconsin, we can win the presidential race with the Republicans and try to restore freedom, restore the American dream. It's possible, and so I am hopeful. No matter how difficult the challenges may be, I am hopeful that we'll overcome the problems, and we will steer the country in the right direction once again. So, anything else you want to add as we conclude the conversation?
Well, I would just say, ultimately, whatever happens, God's in control. But I just really hope and pray that the direction of our country, the direction of our state changes. Because I've been alarmed with what we've seen on the federal level. I've been alarmed at what we've seen in the state level. That's why I stepped up and ran for office, because I thought there was a better way forward. And voters have the ability in November to change the path. And so I think we need to pray for our nation. We need to pray for our leaders, and we need to make sure to vote in our August primary and vote again in November to make that change, to make a difference by casting our vote and changing the direction and the trajectory of our country and state.
Absolutely. What a wonderful message. We have to pray, believe in the power of prayers. We have to pray, and we have to vote. Make your voices heard. Thank you so very much. It was a pleasure having you as a guest on my
Thank you,
channel for
Pastor.
this live stream. And I hope the viewers had a good time with us also. This video is going to be available on my channel for replay. So viewers who are watching, feel free to share this link on your social media pages, share with family, friends, neighbors. Help us spread the message of freedom.
Yeah, and I would say too, I'm on Twitter and Facebook. I have pages on both. X, formerly known as Twitter. I'm at D Varnam, and my last name is Varnam. I'm also on Facebook. If you search for David Varnam, you'll see the page there.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. And once again, it was a pleasure having you. And I'm sure we'll talk again. And we'll stay in touch as we head towards November 2024. Thank you for what you are doing in your community. And hopefully we as a state will unite and elect Donald Trump. So I'm hopeful with that. Thank you so very much. And it was great having you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Tasa. Appreciate the opportunity. Hope you have a great evening.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.